The forests of Northern California, vast, ancient, and serene. But sometimes, serenity can be deceiving. Sometimes, the whisper of the wind through the pines carries with it secrets. Dark, unsettling secrets that refuse to stay buried. For one seasoned park ranger, a routine patrol became a harrowing journey into the unknown. A place where the natural world blurs with something unnatural. What he encountered in the shadows of those towering pines would change him forever. You may think you know what lurks in the wilderness, but as you'll soon hear, some things defy explanation and leave us wondering if we've ever been truly safe out there at all. Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. Thank you for letting me submit my encounter. This is so strange, and I'm sure the audience won't believe me, but here is my story. I've worked as a park ranger for over a decade, but no amount of training or experience could have prepared me for what happened in the fall of 2018. I was stationed in the rugged terrain of Shasta-Trinity National Forest in Northern California. The forest is vast, a sprawling expanse of ancient trees, deep valleys, and peaks that seem to pierce the clouds. It's a place of stunning beauty, and, as I learned, unfathomable terror. My story begins in late November, just before the snow starts blanketing the higher elevations. Most of the summer crowds had thinned, and the forest had taken on an eerie stillness. My task that week was to survey and close off sections of the Pine Ridge Trail that had been damaged by heavy rains. The trail winds through dense pine forests and rocky outcrops, and at times, it feels like the wilderness swallows you whole. On the third day of my assignment, I decided to stay late and finish marking the final section of the trail. The sun was already dipping below the mountains, casting long, jagged shadows across the landscape. I radioed the ranger station to let them know I'd be back after dark and set off down the trail. About 2 miles in, I started noticing strange things. Trees with massive gouges carved into their bark, far higher than any bear could reach. Piles of broken branches arranged in odd patterns along the trail. At first, I chalked it up to the wind or maybe an overzealous camper, but the deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then I found the footprints. They were massive, easily twice the size of my boot, and embedded deep in the muddy trail. I crouched down to get a better look. The prints had 5 toes, but they were splayed wide like a human's, except no human has feet that large. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the tracks were fresh. Whatever made them was close. I decided it was time to head back. The forest, once a familiar friend, now felt hostile, like it was watching me. I quickened my pace, my flashlight cutting through the encroaching darkness. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. I froze, scanning the woods around me, but I saw nothing. Then came the sound of branches snapping, heavy footfalls, and something crashing through the underbrush. Panic set in. I took off down the trail, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps behind me were relentless, closing the distance no matter how fast I ran. I glanced back, and that's when I saw it. The creature burst from the shadows with terrifying speed. Its movements were both powerful and unnervingly fluid, like a predator in its prime. It leaped between trees with ease, its massive arms swinging as it let out guttural screams that echoed through the forest. At one point, it tore a branch clean off a tree and hurled it in my direction. The branch crashed to the ground mere feet from where I was running. The creature's chest heaved as it beat on it with both fists, the sound reverberating through the woods like a war drum. Its piercing golden eyes burned with fury, and its bared teeth glinted in the beam of my flashlight. I veered off the main trail and scrambled up a steep incline, hoping to lose it. But the creature was relentless. Its massive strides and unearthly speed closed the distance faster than I could comprehend. It roared again, a deafening sound that shook me to my core. Somehow I managed to find a side path that led to an old fire road. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but the thought of that creature kept me going. When I finally burst out of the woods onto the gravel road, I collapsed, gasping for air. I thought I was safe until I heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching again. Then came the screams, guttural and enraged, as if the creature was warning me to never return. I reached the ranger station and slammed the door shut behind me, grabbing a rifle from the supply cabinet. The creature let out one final roar before retreating into the darkness, its golden eyes glowing faintly from the tree line. I stayed awake all night, listening to every creak and groan of the building, terrified it would come back. The next morning, I reported the incident to my supervisor, but I left out the details of what I'd seen. Instead, I focused on the fallen trees and strange tracks, hoping they'd send a team to investigate. To my surprise, my supervisor didn't seem shocked. He just nodded and said, "You're not the first ranger to see something out there." He then told me about a discovery from the 1960s. A group of rangers had stumbled upon a grave deep in the forest, containing massive bones and skulls that didn't match any known animal. The bones were ape-like, but far larger than any gorilla. The government allegedly took the remains for study and then buried the incident, claiming it was a hoax. "We're not supposed to talk about it," he said, "but some of us know better." I later spoke with a retired ranger who'd worked in the park during the 1980s. He recalled seeing strange figures moving through the trees at dusk and hearing bone-chilling howls echoing through the valleys. "It's their forest," he told me. "We're just visitors." One local eyewitness I spoke to was adamant that the government knows about these creatures. "They have proof," she said. "Footage, bones, you name it. But they deny everything. They don't want people to panic, or worse, start hunting them." Her conviction left me unsettled, as it mirrored my own experience too closely. I never went back to that section of the park alone. In fact, I transferred to another station the following year. But the memory of that night stays with me. Every time I close my eyes, I see those golden eyeshine and hear that guttural growl. Whatever is out there in the forests of Northern California, it's something we're not meant to understand. The Desolation Wilderness in El Dorado County, California, is a place of pristine beauty, where alpine lakes glimmer beneath ancient pines and the winds whisper through jagged granite peaks. But beneath its tranquil facade lies something older, something darker. The locals tell of a creature, the Hollow Man, that stalks the woods, a pale, clawed figure bound to the land by a curse older than memory itself. This is a tale of terror, grief, and the haunting price of meddling with the unknown. Mark Simmons had always felt the pull of the Desolation Wilderness. Born and raised in a small commune nestled in the forest's edge, he grew up hearing stories of the Hollow Man. His grandmother would sit by the fire, weaving tales of the creature into warnings about wandering too far from home after dark. "The Hollow Man is the forest's shadow," she'd say, her gnarled hands working the beads of her rosary. "It sees everything, hears everything. It's always watching, waiting for those foolish enough to stray." As a child, Mark dismissed her stories as folklore, but now, years later, after returning to the commune to care for his ailing mother, he found himself questioning everything he'd once believed. Long before the settlers came to the Sierra Nevada, the land belonged to the Nisenan people. They spoke of a man named Toha, a shaman who was said to possess great power. Toha was revered until the day he came back from the forest changed. The elders said he had been possessed by a malevolent spirit, one that twisted his body and soul. Toha's once-tanned skin turned as pale as ash, his eyes darkened to voids, and his fingers grew into long, bony claws. He could no longer eat the food of the living, instead developing a hunger for flesh. The Nisenan tried to save him, calling upon their most sacred rituals, but the spirit within him was too strong. Toha killed those who attempted to heal him, his victims disappearing one by one into the wilderness. Eventually, the tribe drove him out, banishing him to the remote forests of what would one day be called Desolation Wilderness. But his legend didn't end there. Mark's mother's condition had worsened, her once sharp mind now clouded by dementia. She often spoke of things she'd seen in the woods, things Mark had dismissed as her failing memory. "It's watching, Mark," she whispered one night, clutching his hand with surprising strength. "The Hollow Man. He's still out there. He never left." That same evening, Mark stepped outside to gather firewood. The air was crisp, the night quiet, except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. But then, he heard it. A soft, rhythmic clicking sound, like bone tapping against stone. He froze, the stories of his childhood rushing back with chilling clarity. In the faint moonlight, he saw something. A pale figure crouched low among the trees. Its gaunt, hollow face turned toward him, black eyes locking onto his. Mark's breath caught as the creature began to move, its elongated limbs scuttling unnaturally fast. He bolted for the house, slamming the door behind him and locking it tight. His mother sat in her chair by the fire, her eyes fixed on him. "You saw him," she said. It wasn't a question. For decades after Toa's banishment, the Nisenan people continued to lose members of their tribe. Hunters never returned from the forest. Families would wake to find loved ones gone without a trace. The elders spoke of Toha's spirit, now fully consumed by the demon, preying on the tribe out of revenge. In desperation, the Nisenan sought to trap him, performing a powerful binding ritual. They sealed him in a sacred cave deep within the forest, using charms and offerings to keep him imprisoned. But they knew the binding was not permanent. As long as people ventured into his domain, the curse would endure. The next morning, Mark woke to chaos. One of the commune's younger residents, Ellie, had gone missing overnight. Her parents were frantic, and a search party was quickly organized. Mark joined them, his encounter with the Hollow Man the night before fresh in his mind. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the clicking sounds began again, faint but unmistakable. The group grew uneasy, their calls for Ellie growing quieter as the oppressive silence of the forest closed in. Then they found her, or what was left of her. Ellie's body lay in a clearing, her skin pale and claw marks raked across her torso. Her eyes stared lifelessly at the sky, her mouth frozen in a scream. Beside her was a crude symbol carved into the dirt, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward. Mark's stomach turned. It was the same symbol his grandmother had drawn in the dirt when telling him stories of the Hollow Man. The demon's mark. The settlers who came after the Nisenan were oblivious to the curse. They built their homes and towns in the shadow of the wilderness, dismissing the tales of the natives as superstition. But the disappearances continued. By the early 20th century, stories of the Hollow Man began to surface again. Campers spoke of pale figures watching them from the tree line. Hikers found mutilated animals arranged in strange patterns. The forest gained a reputation, its beauty overshadowed by its darkness. As the commune mourned Ellie, Mark knew they had to act. He remembered his grandmother's stories, how the Nisenan had tried to bind the Hollow Man. If they could find the cave, maybe they could trap him again. Mark and a small group ventured into the forest, guided by the crude map his grandmother had drawn decades ago. The clicking grew louder as they approached the cave, a yawning maw in the side of a granite cliff. Inside, the air was heavy, the stench of decay overwhelming. The group set their traps and placed charms at the cave's entrance, just as the Nisenan had done. But before they could finish, the Hollow Man appeared. His gaunt form emerged from the shadows, his black eyes glinting with malice. He moved with unnatural speed, his claws slashing through the air as the group scattered. Mark stood his ground, clutching the final charm. He hurled it at the creature, the binding spell activating in a burst of light. The Hollow Man screamed, a sound that shook the very ground before collapsing into the cave's depths. The group sealed the entrance, their breaths ragged as the forest fell silent. The commune has since disbanded, its members unable to bear the weight of what they'd experienced. Mark moved away, but the forest never left him. He still dreams of the Hollow Man, his black eyes watching from the shadows, waiting for the day the bindings fail. The desolation wilderness remains as beautiful as ever, but those who live nearby know better than to venture too far. Because some shadows are more than just darkness. They're alive, hungry, and waiting. My dear watchers, your presence is a gift. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, your courage. But remember, there are others who wander, unaware of the dangers that await. By liking this video and subscribing, you offer them a light in the darkness. Support our channel and keep the stories coming, simply by giving a thumbs up and subscribing and sharing.